I don't blame the lad, of course. It just bothers me that Geranum comes from Nishaya, and I've managed to make hyperspatial contact with some minor Nishayan official, which cost a considerable quantity of credits that I cannot in good conscience charge to the department. And did you find anything that was worth the credits? I rather think so. You know, Geranum is always telling little stories to make his points, stories that are legends on his home planet of Nishaya. It makes him appear to be a man of the people, full of homespun philosophy, who was brought up on an isolated farm on a small world. What of it? Not one of the stories was familiar to the person I spoke to on Nishaya, and aside from that, I had considerable trouble understanding the fellow. He spoke Galactic Standard with a thick accent. I spoke to a few others on the world just to check, and they all had the same accent. And what of that? Geranum doesn't have it. According to the records, he arrived on Trantor when he was 19. It's impossible to spend the first 19 years of your life speaking that barbarous Nishayan version of Galactic Standard and then come to Trantor and lose it. However long he's been here, some trace of the accent would have remained. What do you deduce from all this? What I deduce is that Geranum didn't come from Nishaya at all. In fact, I think he picked Nishaya as the place to pretend to come from simply because it is so out of the way that no one would think of checking it. And where does he come from? Do you have any idea at all? Yes. Which brings us back to this matter of hair. What about hair? I sat there with Geranum, staring at him and feeling uneasy without knowing why. Then finally I realized that it was his hair. There was something about it, a life, a gloss, a perfection to it that I've never seen before. And then I knew. His hair is artificial and carefully grown on a scalp that ought to be innocent of such things. Ought to be? Dora's eyes narrowed. Do you mean? Yes, I do mean. He's from the past-centered, mythology-ridden Mysogen sector of Trantor. That's what he's been laboring to hide. Doris Venably closed her eyes to concentrate. It had been 8 years since she and Harry had visited Mysogen. The pictures arose. The harsh, puritanical, male-centered society. The emphasis on the past. The removal of all body hair to make themselves different so that they would know who they were. Their legends. Their memories of a time when they ruled the galaxy. When their lives were prolonged. When robots existed. Doris opened her eyes. Why, Harry? Why what, dear? Why should he pretend not to be from Mysogen? It's a harsh society, a limiting society. There are always those who chafe over its manner of dictating every action and every thought, who want the greater liberties available in the more secular world outside. It's understandable. So deserters force the growth of artificial hair? No, not generally. The average breakaway, that's what the Mysogenians call the deserters, wears a wig. Really serious breakaways grow false hair. The process is difficult and expensive, but it is almost unnoticeable. Why do the breakaways have to hide the fact that they're from Mysogen? They're not persecuted that I know of. No, they're not. It's worse than that. The Mysogenians aren't taken seriously. They're intelligent, everyone admits that, but their beliefs strike people outside Mysogen as unbelievably foolish, and that view clings even to Mysogenians who are breakaways. A Mysogenian attempt to seize power in the government would be crushed by laughter. Being feared is nothing. Being despised, even, can be lived with. But being laughed at, that's fatal. Geranum wants to be First Minister, so he must have hair, and he must represent himself as having been brought up on some obscure world as far from Mysogen as he can possibly manage. Surely there are some people who are naturally bald, never as completely depilated as Mysogenians force themselves to be. Doris frowned slightly. Does all this help us any? I'm not sure. Couldn't you let it be known that he is a Mysogenian? He must have covered his tracks well, and even if it could be done, I don't want to invite an appeal to bigotry. The social situation on Trantor is bad enough. Then you want minimalism, too. Of course. Then what will you do? I've made an appointment with de Merzel. He may know what to do. Doris looked at him sharply. Harry, are you falling into the trap of expecting de Merzel to solve every problem for you? No, but perhaps he'll solve this one. And if he doesn't, then I'll have to think of something else, won't I? Like what? A look of pain crossed Selden's face. Doris, I don't know. Don't expect me to solve every problem, either. Selden and de Merzel decided to meet in a small yet luxuriously appointed suite at the Dome's Edge Hotel just outside the palace grounds. Seeing de Merzel brought back the old days achingly for Harry Selden. The mere fact that de Merzel still looked exactly as he always had made the ache sharper. His face still had its strong, regular features. He was still tall and sturdy-looking, with the same dark hair with the hint of blonde. He was not handsome, but was gravely distinguished. He looked like someone's ideal picture of an imperial first minister. It was his appearance, Selden thought, that gave him half his power over the emperor, and therefore over the imperial court, and therefore over the empire. De Merzel advanced toward him, a gentle smile curving his lips. They sat down together. Harry, it is pleasant to see you. I was half afraid you would change your mind and cancel. I was more than half afraid you would, First Minister. Ito, if you fear using my real name. I couldn't. It won't come out of me. You know that. It will to me. Say it. I would rather like to hear it. Selden hesitated, as though he couldn't believe his lips could frame the words. Daniel. Daniel Oliver. Yes. How is Doris? Wonderful. A true wife. Hounds me to death with her worries over my safety. That is her job. So she reminds me frequently. Seriously, Daniel, I can never be sufficiently grateful to you for bringing us together. Thank you, Harry. But, to be truthful, I did not foresee married happiness for either of you, especially not Doris. Thank you for the gift, just the same. I'm delighted. But it is a gift you will find that may be of dubious further consequence, as is my friendship. To this Selden could make no reply. How are your young protégés, Hugo and Rach? Doesn't Doris report? She would in a crisis, not otherwise. She is reluctant to play the role of spy in non-essentials. Again the small smile. Selden grunted. My boys are doing well. Hugo is increasingly difficult to handle. He's more of a psychohistorian than I am, and I think he feels I hold him back. As for Rach, he's a lovable rascal, always was. He won me over when he was a dreadful street urchin. And what's more surprising is he won over Doors. De Merzel nodded, and Selden continued somberly. If Rochelle of Y hadn't found him lovable, I would not be here today. I would have been shot down. He stirred uneasily. I hate to think of that, Daniel. It was such an entirely accidental and unpredictable event. How could psychohistory have helped in any way? Have you not told me that, at best, psychohistory can deal only in probabilities, not with individuals? But if the individual happens to be crucial, I suspect you will find that no individual is ever truly crucial. Not even I, or you. Perhaps you're right. I find that no matter how I work away under these assumptions, I nevertheless think of myself as crucial. And you are crucial, too, which is something I have come here to discuss with you. I must know. Know what? Geranum. Selden bit off the word as though feeling the mention of the name alone should be sufficient. Ah, yes. You know about him? Of course. Well, I want to know about him, too. What do you want to know? Come, Daniel, don't play with me. Is he dangerous? Of course he's dangerous. I mean to you, to your position as First Minister. That is exactly what I mean. That is how he is dangerous. And you allow it? Demerzel leaned forward. Let us be philosophical about it. His Imperial Majesty, Cleon, has now been on the throne for 18 years, and for all that time I have been his Chief of Staff and then his First Minister. It is a long time, and First Ministers rarely remain that long in power. You are not the ordinary First Minister, Daniil. You must remain in power while psychohistory is being developed. Without you, what would happen? Geranum is raising the Empire against you. Trantor, Harry, Trantor. The outer worlds are solid and reasonably contented even in the midst of a declining economy. But Trantor is where it counts. Trantor, the capital of the Empire. You cannot keep your post if Trantor says no. I agree. And if you go, what will keep the Empire from degenerating rapidly into anarchy? That is a possibility, certainly. So you must be doing something about it. Hugo is convinced that you're in deadly danger and can't maintain your position. His intuition tells him so. Dors says the same thing and explains it in terms of the 3 laws or 4 of robotics, put in Demerzel. Young Rach seems attracted to Geranum's doctrines, being of Dalite origin, you see, and I am uncertain. So I come to you for comfort, I suppose. Tell me that you have the situation well in hand. I have no comfort to offer. I am in danger. Are you doing nothing? I'm doing a great deal to contain discontent and blunt Geranum's message, but what I'm doing is not enough. Selden hesitated. Finally he said, I believe that Geranum is actually a misogynian. Is that so? It is my opinion. I had thought we might use that against him, but I hesitate to unleash the forces of bigotry. You are wise to hesitate. There are many things that might be done that have side effects we do not want. I have not yet been able to think of anything I might do that would surely destroy Geranum, and just as surely avoid anarchy. Minimalism, whispered Selden. Pardon me. Dors explained that you would be bound by minimalism, and so I am. Then my visit with you is a failure, Daniil. You mean that you came for comfort and didn't get it? I'm afraid so. But I saw you because I sought comfort as well. From me? From psychohistory, which should envision the route to safety that I cannot. Selden sighed heavily. Daniil, psychohistory has not been developed to that point. The First Minister looked at him gravely. You've had 8 years, Harry. It might be 8 or 800, and it might not be developed to that point. It is an intractable problem. Demerzel's tone lightened. I do not expect the technique to have been perfected, but you may have some principle that you can use as guidance. Imperfectly, perhaps, but better than mere guesswork. No more than I had 8 years ago. Here's what it amounts to, then. You must remain in power, and Geranum must be destroyed in order to maintain imperial stability, so that I may have a reasonable chance to work out psychohistory. This cannot be done, however, unless I work out psychohistory first. Is that it? It would seem so, Harry. Then we argue in a useless circle, and the Empire is destroyed. Unless something unforeseen happens. Unless you make something unforeseen happen. Daniil, how can I do that without psychohistory? I don't know, Harry. And Selden rose to go, in despair. For days thereafter, Harry Selden neglected his departmental duties to use his computer in its news-gathering mode. Ideally, the computer would report anything that was out of the ordinary on any world of the Empire. A coded and unobtrusive warning light would make itself evident, and Selden could track it down easily. Such a light rarely showed, for the definition of out of the ordinary dealt with large-scale and rare upheavals. What one did in its absence was to ring in various worlds at random. It was a depressing task, for there were no worlds that didn't have their daily, relatively minor catastrophes. But for all their disorders and misfortunes, Selden found no evidence of any overall situation that clearly showed a decline in the last 8 years. Yet in de Merzel's absence, Selden found he could no longer think of him as Daniil, said the decline was continuing. Selden's eyes were, however, struck by the Dahl sector. The elections for the Dahl sector council had placed 5 Geranimites into office. Selden found it a disturbing indication of the progress being made by the demagogue. He ordered a microchip of the item and took it home with him that evening. Rach looked up from his computer as Selden entered. "I'm helping Mom on some reference material she needs. What about your own work?" "Done, Dad. All done." "Good. Look at this." Selden showed Rach the chip in his hand before slipping it into the microprojector. Rach glanced at the news item. "Yes, I know." "You do?" "Sure, I usually keep track of Dahl. Home sector and all." "And what do you think about it?" "I'm not surprised. Are you? The rest of Toronto treats Dahl like dirt. Why shouldn't they go from Geranim's views?" "Do you go for them also?" "Well," Rach twisted his face thoughtfully, "I've got to admit some things he says appeal to me. He says he wants equality for all people. What's wrong with that?" "Nothing at all, if he means it. If he isn't just using it as a ploy to get votes." "True enough, Dad. But most Dahlites probably figure, what's there to lose? We don't have equality now." Selden was thinking rapidly. "Rach, how would you like to visit Dahl now, alone, in charge of yourself, now that you're fully 20? Rach chuckled. "Mom would never allow that." "I don't intend to ask her permission. The question is, would you be willing to do this for me?" "Sure. I'd like to see what's happened to the old place." "Can you spare the time from your studies?" "Sure. I'll never miss a week or so. I'm not thinking of this as a fun vacation. I'd be surprised if you did. I don't think you know what a fun vacation is, Dad. I'm surprised you know the phrase." "Don't be impertinent. When you go there, I want you to meet with Alaskan Geranim. He's going to be in Dahl. He's been asked to speak to the Dahl Sector Council with its new Geranimite members." Rach looked startled. "How do I do that, Dad? I don't figure he keeps open house." "I'll leave it up to you. You would have known how to do it when you were 12. I hope your keen edge hasn't been blunted too badly in the intervening years." Rach smiled. "I hope not. But suppose I do see him. What then?" "Well, find out what you can, what he's really planning." "Do you really think he's going to tell me?" "I wouldn't be surprised if he does. You have the trick of inspiring confidence, you miserable youngster. Let's talk about it." And so they did, several times. Selden's thoughts were painful. Rach was the only one, it seemed to him, who could possibly manage to worm himself into Geranim's confidence. But was Rach the proper tool for the purpose? He was a Dahlite, and sympathetic to Geranim. How far could Selden trust him? Horrible. Rach was his son, and Selden had never had occasion to mistrust Rach before. If Selden doubted the efficacy of his notion, he had no doubt as to what Dora's reaction would be when presented with the fait accompli, and he was not disappointed, if that was quite the word to express his emotion. She was cold-eyed when she said, "You sent him to Dahl? Alone?" "I had to. It was necessary." "Let me understand. You sent him to that den of thieves, that haunt of assassins, that conglomeration of all that is criminal, and you sent him alone. What I need him for requires that he be alone. And what do you need him for?" But Selden was stubbornly silent about that. Dora said, "Has it come to this? You don't trust me?" "It's a gamble. I alone dare take the risk. I can't involve you or anyone else. But I'll tell you this much. I'm hoping he'll see Geranum, who will be visiting Doll." "Oh, and what do you expect Rach to do? Fill him with bitter regrets over his wicked politics and send him back to Mysogen? Come, really, if you're going to take this sardonic attitude, there's no use discussing it." Selden looked away from her, out the window at the blue-gray sky under the dome. "What I expect him to do is save the Empire." "To be sure. That would be much easier." "It's what I expect. You have no solution. De Merzel has no solution. He's as much said that the solution rests with me. That's what I'm striving for, and that's what I need Rach for in Doll. After all, you know that ability of his to inspire affection. It worked with us, and I'm convinced it will work with Geranum. If I am right, all may be well." Dor's eyes widened a trifle. "Are you now going to tell me that you are being guided by psychohistory?" "No, but Hugo is constantly talking about intuition, and I have mine." "Intuition?" "Yes." But Selden kept to himself what he dared not share with Dors. What if Rach's charm were gone? Or worse, what if the consciousness of being a Dollite became too strong for him? Billy Bottom was Billy Bottom. Dirty, sprawling, dark, sinuous Billy Bottom, exuding decay and yet full of a vitality that Rach was convinced was to be found nowhere else on Trantor. He had last seen the Doll sector when he was not much more than 12, but even the people seemed to be the same, still a mixture of the hangdog and the irreverent, filled with a synthetic pride and a grumbling resentment. The men were marked by their dark, rich mustaches, and the women by their sack-like dresses that now looked tremendously slatternly to Rach's older and more worldly wise eyes. Rach stood there, lost in thought and memory, and tried to convince himself that he remembered this particular place or that. The gaps in his memory were enormous. His life since leaving Billy Bottom had been so different that all before it faded like a misty dream. But the smells were there. He stopped outside a bakery, low and dingy, and smelled the coconut icing that reeked through the air, that he had never quite smelled elsewhere. Even when he had stopped to buy tarts with coconut icing, even when they were advertised as Doll style, they had been faint imitations. He felt strongly tempted. Well, why not? He had the credits, and Dors was not there to wrinkle her nose and wonder aloud how clean or not clean the place might be. The shop was dim, and it took a while for Rach's eyes to acclimate. There were a few low tables in the place with a couple of rather insubstantial chairs at each. A young man sat at one, an empty cup before him, wearing a once-white T-shirt that probably would have looked even dirtier in a better light. The baker stepped out from a room in the rear. "What'll you have?" "A Coke Icer." Rach used a slang term he remembered well from the old days. "Want a bag?" "No, I'll eat it here." He paid and took the Coke Icer from the other's hand and bit into its richness, his eyes half closing as he did so. "Hey!" Rach opened his eyes. It was the man at the table. "Are you speaking to me, bub?" "Yeah. What you doing?" "Eating a Coke Icer. What's it to you?" Automatically he'd assumed the Billy Bottom way of talking. "What you doing in Billy Bottom?" "Born here. Raised here. In a bed, not in the street, like you." The insult came easily. "That's so. You dress pretty good for a Billy Bottomer. Pretty fancy-dancy. Got a perfume stink about you." He held up a little finger to imply femininity. "I won't talk about your stink. I went up in the world." "Up in the world. La-dee-da." Two other men stepped into the bakery. The man at the table turned to the newcomers. "This guy's gone up in the world. Says he's a Billy Bottomer." One of the two newcomers shambled a mock salute and grinned with no appearance of amiability. His teeth were discolored. "Ain't that nice? It's always good to see a Billy Bottomer go up in the world. Gives 'em a chance to help their poor, unfortunate sector people. Like credits. You can always spare a credit or two for the poor, hey?" "How many you got, mister?" the other newcomer asked. "Hey, said the man behind the counter. "All you guys get out of my store. I don't want no trouble here." "There'll be no trouble. I'm leaving." Rach made to go, but the seated man put a leg in his way. "Don't go, pal. We'd miss your company." Rach smiled. "One time, when I was in Billy Button, guys, I was with my old man and old lady, and there were 10 guys who stopped us. 10. I counted them. We had to take care of them." "Yeah? Your old man took care of 10. "My old man? Nah, he wouldn't waste his time. My old lady did. And I can do it better than she can. And there are only 3 of you. So if you don't mind, out of the way." "Sure. Just leave all your credits. Some of your clothes, too." The man at the table rose to his feet. There was a knife in his hand. "There you are. Now you're going to waste my time." Rach had finished his Coke Icer, and he half-turned. Then, as quickly as thought, he anchored himself to the table while his right leg shot out and the point of his toe landed unerringly in the groin of the man with the knife. Down the man went with a loud cry. Up went the table, driving a second man toward the wall and keeping him there, while Rach's right arm flashed out with the edge of the palm striking hard against the larynx of the third, who coughed and went down. Rach now stood there with a knife in each hand. "Now, which one of you wants to move?" They glared at him, but remained frozen in place. "In that case, I will leave now." But the server, who had retreated to the back room, must have summoned help, for 3 more men had entered the store while the server screeched, "Troublemakers! Nothing but troublemakers!" The newcomers were dressed in uniform, but one that Rach had never seen. Trousers were tucked into boots, loose green T-shirts were belted, and odd semi-spherical hats that looked vaguely comic were perched on their heads. On the left shoulder of each T-shirt were the letters J.G. The leader of these 3 men spoke. "I'm Corporal Quimber. What's been going on?" The defeated Billy Botners were scrambling to their feet, clearly the worse for wear. The corporal stared at them with a philosophic eye, then turned to Rach. "Are you a Billy Botner boy?" "Born and bred, but I've lived elsewhere for 8 years. Are you security officers?" "No. You won't find security officers in Billy Bottom much. We're the Geranum Guard, and we keep the peace here. We know these 3, and they've been warned. We'll take care of them. You're a problem, Buster." "Name, reference number." Rach told them. "And what happened here?" Rach told them. "And your business here?" Rach sighed. If he'd gone directly to a sector hall, as he should have done, if he had not stopped to drown himself in nostalgia for Coke Icers. "I have come on important business to see Mr. Geranum, and since you seem to be part of his organization, to see the leader." "Yes, Corporal." "With 2 knives on you." "For self-defense. I wasn't going to have them on me when I saw Mr. Geranum." "So you say. We're taking you into custody, mister. We'll get to the bottom of this." Rach was listening with an agonized impatience that he was trying not to show. He was sitting in an improvised cell, deep in the warrens of Billy Bottom. The man with him, clad in the green of the Geranumite Guard, was either a missionary, a brainwasher, or a kind of theologian manqué. At any rate, he had announced his name to be Sander Nee, and he was delivering a long message in a thick, dull-eyed accent that he had clearly learned by heart. "If the people of Dal want to enjoy equality, they must show themselves worthy of it. Good rule, quiet behavior, seemly pleasures are all requirements. We must be clean in word and—" "I agree with you, Guardsman Nee," Rach broke in. "Every word. But I must see Mr. Geranum." The guardsman shook his head. "You can't unless you got some appointment." "Look, I'm the son of an important mathematics professor at Streeling University." "Don't know no professor. I thought you was from Dal." "Of course I am. Can't you tell the way I talk?" "And you got an old man who's a professor at a big university." "Don't sound likely." "Well, he's my foster father." The guardsman shook his head. "You know anyone in Dal?" "There's Mother Rita. She'll know me." She had been very old when she'd known him. She might be dead by now. "Never heard of her." "There's Hugo Amarillo." A dim spark seemed to light Nee's eyes.
Who?
Hugo Amaral. My father took him out of the heat sinks 8 years ago.
Well, I'll send someone.
20 minutes passed before Nee returned with Corporal Quimber. Who is this Dalite you know? Asked Quimber. Raich explained. What heat sink did he work in? Raich thought for a moment. I was only a kid then, but it was a C2, I think. Close enough, C3. Then you know about him, Corporal? Not personally, but the story is famous in the heat sinks, and I've worked there too. Maybe that's how you've heard of it. Have you any evidence that you really know Hugo Amaral? Look, I'm going to write down my name and my father's name. Then I'm going to write down one word. Get in touch with Mr. Geranum and just read him my name, my father's name, and the one word. I'm sure that will get me out of here in 3 seconds, and that you'll get a promotion. What's the one word? Psychohistory. Cleon I was no longer quite the handsome young monarch that his holographs portrayed. His most recent birthday had been celebrated with the usual pomp and ritual, but it was his 40th, just the same. The Emperor could find nothing wrong with being 40. His health was perfect. He had gained a little weight, but not much. His face would perhaps look older if it were not for the micro-adjustments that were made periodically, and that gave him a slightly enameled look. Cleon looked at his hologram in the mirror, and thought he looked a bit better if he did not actualize the third dimension. Now take Demerzel. Faithful, reliable, necessary, unbearable Demerzel. No change in him. He maintained his appearance, and as far as Cleon knew, there had been no micro-adjustments either. Change. It reminded Cleon that he had called Demerzel in for a purpose, and not just so that he might stand there while the Emperor ruminated. Demerzel would take too much imperial rumination as a sign of old age. "Demerzel," he said aloud. "Sire, this fellow Geranum, I tire of hearing of him." "There is no reason you should hear of him, sire. He is one of those phenomena that are thrown to the surface of the news for a while and then disappear." "But he doesn't disappear." "Sometimes it takes a while, sire." "What do you think of him, Demerzel?" "He is dangerous, but has a certain popularity. It is the popularity that increases the danger." "If you find him dangerous, and I find him annoying, why must we wait? Can't he simply be imprisoned, or executed, or something?" "The political situation on Trantor, sire, is delicate. It is always delicate. When have you told me that it is anything but delicate?" "We live in delicate times, sire. It would be useless to move strongly against him if that would but exacerbate the danger." "I don't like it. I may not be widely read. An emperor doesn't have the time to be widely read. But I know my imperial history, at any rate. There have been a number of cases of these populists, as they're called, that have seized power in the last couple of centuries. In every case, they reduced the reigning emperor to a mere figurehead. I do not wish to be a figurehead, Demerzel." "It is unthinkable that you would be, sire." "It won't be unthinkable if you do nothing." "I am attempting to take measures, sire, but cautious ones." "There's one fellow at least who isn't cautious. A month or so ago, a university professor, stopped a potential Geranumite riot single-handedly. He stepped right in and put a stop to it." "So he did, sire. How did you come to hear of it?" "Because he is a certain professor in whom I am interested. How is it that you didn't speak to me of this?" Demerzel was almost obsequious. "Would it be right for me to trouble you with every insignificant detail that crosses my desk?" "Insignificant? This man who took action was Harry Selden." "That was, indeed, his name."
And the name was a familiar one. Did he not present a paper some years ago at the last decennial convention that interested us? Yes, sire. Cleon looked pleased. As you see, I do have a memory. I need not depend on my staff for everything. I interviewed this Selden fellow on the matter of his paper, did I not? Your memory is indeed flawless, sire. What happened to his idea? It was a fortune-telling device. My flawless memory does not bring to mind what he called it. Psychohistory, sire. It was not precisely a fortune-telling device, but a theory as to ways of predicting general trends in future human history. And what happened to it? Nothing, sire. As I explained at the time, the idea turned out to be wholly impractical. Yet he is capable of taking action to stop a potential riot. Would he have dared to do this if he didn't know in advance he would succeed? Isn't that evidence that this psychohistory is working? It is merely evidence that Harry Selden is foolhardy, sire. Even if the psychohistoric theory were practical, it would not have been able to yield results involving a single person or a single action. You're not the mathematician, Demerzel. He is. I think it is time I questioned him again. After all, it is not long before the decennial convention is upon us once more. It would be a useless... Demerzel, I desire it. See to it. Yes, sire.
Harry Selden watched the raindrops form on the wraparound windows of the Imperial ground car, and a sense of nostalgia stabbed at him unbearably. It was only the second time in his 8 years on Trantor that he had been ordered to visit the Emperor in the only open land on the planet, and both times the weather had been bad. The first time, shortly after he had arrived on Trantor, the bad weather had merely irritated him. He had found no novelty in it. His home world of Helicon had its share of storms. But now he had lived for 8 years in make-believe weather, and was seeing real rain coming down drearily from a cold sky. It reminded him of Helicon, of his youth, of relatively carefree days, and he wondered if he might persuade the driver to take the long way to the palace. Impossible. The Emperor wanted to see him, and it was a long enough trip by ground car, even if one went in a straight line with no interfering traffic. The Emperor, of course, would not wait. Cleon I met Harry Selden alone, in the same lavishly furnished room of their first encounter. As was the custom, Selden waited to be addressed. "Glad to see you, Professor. Let us dispense with formalities." "Yes, sire," said Selden stiffly. It was not always safe to be informal merely because the Emperor ordered you to be so in an effusive moment. Cleon I gestured imperceptibly, and at once the room came alive with automation as the table set itself and dishes began to appear. "You will dine with me, Selden?" "I would be honored, sire." Selden looked around cautiously. He knew very well that one did not, or at any rate should not, ask questions of the Emperor, but he saw no way out of it. "The First Minister will not dine with us?" "He will not. He has other tasks at this moment, and I wish, in any case, to speak to you privately." They ate quietly for a while, Cleon gazing at him fixedly. "Selden, the First Minister is of great use to me, yet I feel that, at times, people may think I do not have a mind of my own. Do you think that?" "Never, sire. No use protesting too much." "I don't believe you. However, I do have a mind of my own, and I recall that when you first came to Trantor, you had this psychohistory thing you were playing with." "I'm sure you also remember, sire, that I explained at the time it was a mathematical theory without practical application.
So you said. Do you still say so?
Yes, sire.
Have you been working on it since?
On occasion I toy with it, but it comes to nothing. Chaos, unfortunately, interferes, and predictability is not— The Emperor interrupted.
There is a specific problem I wish you to tackle. Do help yourself to the dessert, Selden. It is very good.
What is the problem, sire?
This man, Joranum. De Merzel tells me, oh, so politely, that I cannot arrest this man, and I cannot use force to crush his followers. He says it will simply make the situation worse.
If the First Minister says so, I presume it is so.
But I do not want this man Joranum. At any rate, I will not be his puppet. De Merzel does nothing.
I am sure that he is doing what he can, sire.
If he is working to alleviate the problem, he is certainly not keeping me informed.
The First Minister may feel that if Joranum should— if he should—
Take over.
Cleon's tone conveyed infinite distaste. Yes, sire. It would not be wise to have it appear that you were personally opposed to him. You must remain untouched for the sake of the stability of the Empire.
I would much rather assure the stability of the Empire without Joranum. What do you suggest, Selden?
I, sire.
You, Selden. Let me say that I don't believe you when you say that psychohistory is just a game. De Merzel stays friendly with you. Do you think I am such an idiot as not to know that? He expects something from you, and since I am no fool, I expect it too. What are you doing about Joranum?
Sire, I have sent my son to meet with Joranum in the Dahl sector.
Why?
My son is a Dahlite, and shrewd. He may discover something of use to us.
May?
Only may, sire.
You'll keep me informed?
Yes, sire.
And Selden, do not tell me that psychohistory is just a game, that it does not exist. I do not want to hear that. I expect you to use it to do something about Joranum. What it might be, I can't say. But you must do something. I will not have it otherwise. You may go.
Selden returned to Streeling University in a far darker mood than when he had left. Cleon had sounded as though he would not accept failure. It all depended on Rach now. Rach sat in the anteroom of a public building in Dahl, into which he had never ventured, never could have ventured, as a ragamuffin youth. He felt, in all truth, a little uneasy about it now, as though he were trespassing. He tried relaxing while keeping an eye on the official who was manipulating a computer at the desk. The official was not a Dahlite. He was, in fact, Gambaldine Namarty. Every once in a while, Namarty would look up from his desk and glance at Rach with a hostile glare. This Namarty wasn't buying Rach's lovability. Rach could see that. Finally, Joranum arrived, sweeping in, smiling his public smile of warmth and confidence. Namarty's hand came up and Joranum stopped. They spoke together in low voices. It seemed plain to Rach that Namarty was arguing against the meeting. Then Joranum looked at Rach, smiled, and pushed Namarty to one side. Joranum strode toward him and held out a plump, slightly moist hand. "Well, well, Professor Selden's young man. How are you?" "Fine, thank you, sir." "You've come with a message from your father, I trust. I hope he is reconsidering his decision and has decided to join me in my great crusade." "I don't think so, sir." Joranum frowned slightly. "Are you here without his knowledge?" "No, sir, he sent me." "I see. Are you hungry, lad?" "Not at the moment, sir." Then would you mind if I eat? I don't get much time for the ordinary amenities of life. He smiled broadly. It's all right with me, sir. Together they moved to a table and sat down. Geranum unwrapped a sandwich and took a bite. Why did he send you, son? Rache shrugged. I think he thought I might find out something about you that he could use against you. He's heart and soul with First Minister de Merzel. And you're not? No, sir. I'm a Dahlite. I know you are, Mr. Selden. What does that mean? It means I'm oppressed, so I'm on your side. I want to help you. Of course, I wouldn't want my father to know. There's no reason he should know. How do you propose to help me? Geranum glanced quickly at Namardi, who was leaning against his desk, listening, with his arms folded and his expression lowering. I've got something to tell you that maybe you won't believe. Indeed? Try me. It's about First Minister Ito de Merzel. Well? Rache looked around uneasily. Can anyone hear me? Just Namardi and myself. All right, then. Listen. This guy de Merzel ain't a guy. He's a robot.